How do you go about refinishing a piece? So, the two most common questions I get asked about my finishing mix are, number one, how durable is it for something like a dining table? And number two, how do you repair it if something goes wrong? Now, I'm not gonna address the former question in this video. You're just gonna have to take my word for it. It is durable. It is a finish that I use on my dining table personally, and it's held up well. Perhaps that's another topic for another video. But the second question, which we're addressing today, how do you repair the finish? Let me show you. Now, for inquiring minds, my finishing mix, which is 1 part urethane, 1 part oil, 1 part thinner of some kind, whether that's mineral spirits or turpentine, is really a bastardization of the Malou finish. I admit that. It's not a thing I invented. It's a formula that I tinkered with and got to a point where I like it and can apply it consistently. It's not exactly the same as Malou's formula, but if you want to check that out, you can click the link in whichever corner it lives in. Today, we're talking about how to repair a finish when something goes wrong. This is a sculpture I made almost 2 years ago. Is it almost 3 years ago? Did I make it in 2020? I think I made it in the winter of 2020. It was around Christmas of 2020 that I made this piece. And I carved it from an oak log that had been felled for about 3 or 4 years, and the moisture hadn't yet completely left the log. So when I carved it, it was smooth, it was clean, there were no checks in there, and then over time, over the last 3 years, it has continued to dry out, shrank as the evaporation continued to take place. That moisture was being wicked out to the surface of the wood, and it was drawing the finish out with it. And so what ended up happening is I have these rough spots on the finish, just kind of these clumps of finish that have seeped out into minor checks, and that's no bueno. That doesn't look good, that doesn't feel good when you run your hand over it, and that's what we're gonna repair. The other thing that's happened, on the back of this sculpture, you have this spot down here where this was an iron oxide stain. What happened is somebody drove a nail into this tree eons ago, and as it grew up, it developed this black stain because of the high tannic acid content in oak. It's a science thing, don't worry about it. But I bleached this section to get rid of most of that stain. There's just a small remnant left of it down here. Consequently, what's happened is, again, as that water has been pulled out of the piece of wood, it has pulled some of that bleach out with it, and it is creating kind of this milky stain on the back of this sculpture, and that's no bueno. So we're gonna try to sand that back as well so we can repair that finish. Now you could, in theory, just throw some finish over the top of this and call it a day, but you run a couple of risks by doing that. Number one, you don't know what is on the surface of this thing to contaminate the finish that you're applying now. There could be some kind of oil on here. You could have waxed it. You could have used like that lemon oil furniture restoration stuff that's just has a high silica content, and that can cause all kinds of problems, especially with fill building finishes like a urethane, water-based or oil-based notwithstanding. So the first thing we actually got to do is clean this bloody thing. And that's where a thinner like mineral spirits comes in. So what I'm gonna do first is I'm gonna take a little bit of sandpaper, I'm gonna apply some mineral spirits to that, and then I'm essentially just gonna wet sand this whole thing using mineral spirits. And that's gonna do two things simultaneously. Number one, gonna knock down all these high spots that are on here from that finish seeping out of the sculpture over time. But number two, and more importantly, what the mineral spirits specifically are doing is it's going to loosen up any wax or oils on there, dissolve them, wash them away, so that our new layer of finish can actually adhere to the previous layer. All right, now we've got this thing all buttered up and she's looking good. The finish is nice and even, but it is very shiny and it is a little bit too much finish. So this is an important step, is to make sure I remove any excess finish. I get a lot of questions in the comment section about finish being still tacky after like 3 or 4 days, and that's likely due to an excessive buildup of finish on the surface. So if you're doing more than say 2 to 3 coats, you always want to come in and remove that excess finish afterward. With just a clean rag, just wipe it down so that you're not building up too fast. Now you can already tell at this point that sheen is quite a bit lower. It's not so bright and plasticky and shiny. It's not wet looking and super glossy. It's closer to a satin. It's a bright satin, but it's closer to a satin. Now, there's not much I can do to this for a little while. You want to give it at least overnight to cure, preferably about 72 hours before you really bring it home. So I will give this the evening to rest, and then tomorrow I'll come in and I'll throw a coat of wax on it. And that's all there really is to it. Simple as sand, apply, buff, rinse, and repeat. Just do that over and over until you get a sheen and a buildup that you're happy with. And one quick note on color changing and oxidation. Now, the sheen is a pretty good match here, right? You can't tell just from the sheen that that has been fixed, but you can tell that there is a mild discoloration. That is not something that I would personally worry about, because what this is as the material oxidizes over time, meaning that it's interacting with the oxygen and with the sunlight, so it's photoreactive as well, oak gets darker, like most woods do. Everything goes to gray, but oak gets this kind of dark, deep brown to it. And all of this is removing that layer of oxidation and exposing the fresh lumber underneath. So if I were to sand everything down, you would have that fresh oak look to it. The reason I don't worry about that is because within probably 2 to 3 months, that's gonna deepen up to a point where it's very, very close. And then I would say within a year, it's gonna be even and you're never gonna be able to tell that it was patched at all. Being on the backside of a sculpture, nobody's really going to see it, so I'm not too worried about it. Even if it was my own personal dining table, I wouldn't worry about it too much. If it was a client's table and I was being paid to refinish it, that's when I would sand the entire surface to make sure you get an even tone on the tabletop. So friends, that's that. Another one in the books. I hope this was helpful. I hope it was interesting. I hope it was somewhat entertaining. This is a thing I've been meaning to do for a while, refinishing this sculpture, and I get a lot of questions about that finishing process and about the refinishing process as well. How durable is it? How does it hold up to being spot refinished if I have kids running around my house damaging furniture? So I thought it would be a good vehicle to address some of those questions. But now, time to get back to doing things. So go make a thing, go enjoy doing it, and as always, till next week, friends, cheers.